Hi everyone, thanks for joining us at this Your Overseas Home webinar. My name is Rosie Bradley. I'm an editor at YOH at Your Overseas Home, and I'll be hosting this session. Today we're discussing the common pitfalls for French home buyers, for buyers in France, and how to avoid them. Two experts that you need to help buy a property safely in France. It's great to have you both with us today. We're delighted to be able to help you make your dream to own a property overseas a reality. Today's session will be about an hour long. For those of you listening live, there will be an opportunity to ask questions to the speakers. If you wish to ask anything, you can just pop them in the question box on your bottom right of your screen. If you need a reminder of anything discussed today or want to share this webinar with family and friends, there will be a lovely recording available tomorrow on your Overseas Home website to watch in your own time. So the most common pitfalls for buying property in France often regard confusion around legalities and financial things that you need to sort before you go. So I'm delighted to be joined today by two of our experts. The first is George Finch, a senior trader at Smart Currency Exchange. And we also have Leah Maynard, a solicitor from Buckles, a leading French law firm. So enough from me. I'd like to introduce George and ask him to start by giving us an introduction to Smart and how it can support you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So hello to everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And obviously thanks for attending. So yeah, my name's George, here representing Smart Currency Exchange. So I'm one of the senior traders here. Been on the account management team at Smart for coming up to 3 years now, but been in the currency industry in general for closer to 10. So very well versed in property, obviously currency, and how the two marry together. So bit of background on Smart. We're obviously a foreign exchange specialist focusing primarily on property related transactions. So sales, purchases, and obviously everything in between. So been in the market for coming up to 20 years now. So obviously first incorporated 2004. And over that time have helped probably close to 40,000 people in obviously very similar situations to obviously yourselves, transferring money internationally, successfully buy, sell property. Within that, obviously our primary aim as a currency specialist is to help, so you see yourself, clients, keep their buying costs, obviously selling costs as low as possible, and obviously within a sensible budget. The way we aim to do that, and really where we specialize is in the risk management side. So obviously currency can be a minefield, obviously as with any financial market, very, very volatile. So, you know, if you're dipping your feet in for the first time, I'm sure a lot of you are first time buyers abroad, you know, you need to be managing that risk essentially as effective as possible, which is my job as a trader and account manager. So you're obviously no doubt keeping a close eye on exchange rates moving up, down. You can see the volatile nature of it all. So you're probably seeing a change in certainly the prices on a lot of sort of estate agency websites. Prices change daily. Certainly if you're looking at it in sterling. So our job's to work with you as closely as possible. Obviously tailor hopefully a strategy that is unique to you and obviously your individual purchase. That's I suppose a brief outline as to what we do here at Smart and more specifically what my role is, on the trading team.
Fab, thanks George. And secondly, we have Leah Maynard. Leah, do you want to just give us a background into who you are and what Buckles does?
Yes, of course. Hi Rosie, hi everybody, thanks for joining us today. My name is Leah. As you will gather from the accent, I am French and I am one of the lawyers with the French team with Buckles Solicitors. We are a small team with 3 lawyers and we specialized in French property and inheritance law. So as a team, we've got a collective experience of over 20 years helping people like you who are looking to buy in beautiful France. The way we work is that we would advise you from the time you are ready to make an offer up until the end of the purchase process, which is obviously the signature of the transfer deed on completion. We would help you by reviewing your offer, especially reviewing your preliminary contract, the infamous compromis or promesse de vente, which is the most important part of the process, and then really just holding your hand in terms of negotiating any conditions and keeping an eye on the legalities until you are ready to complete. We also advise on inheritance and ownership structure, which are some things that we don't always think about, but are very, very important, because in France we have forced heirship, which means that when you buy your property, you want to plan how it is going to be inherited. So that's something we also have as well. We obviously used to working in a collaborative manner, so we will work with your currency dealer, we will work with your estate agent and with your notaire in France, all in a friendly way to make sure that the process is as smooth and as enjoyable for you as possible.
Lovely, thanks, Leah. So basically, the way we're going to structure this session is just going to be question and answer, either to our experts here, George and Leah. So if we start off, I know a lot of the pitfalls concerning currency, George, for moving abroad is a lot to do with the exchange rates changing quite often. It's a very volatile market. So what are the different transfer options for transferring funds overseas?
Yeah, so really good starting point, as you say. Obviously, volatile nature of the market means there are multiple options available. And obviously we can use those in isolation. We could use a combination of those, as sort of highlighted in my introduction. We can obviously tailor those as uniquely as possible to individual clients. So your main transfer options are, so you can have a traditional spot contract, which is, I mean, if you've ever bought currency ever before, whether that's bureau de change, cash, if you might have a business, probably what you've used, which is essentially buying currency, clues in the title, on the spot. So you're taking the live exchange rate there and then. Obviously, that could be on the day of purchasing your property, whether that's your deposit payment, whether that's your balance completion. Of course, you could choose any day in between, but you're essentially buying on the spot. And the key is you're settling that, what we call trade, pretty quickly. So you've essentially got a 3-day window to transfer your full balance. So obviously from that suits people who are perhaps cash buyers. You know, they've got funding readily available, or they've got somewhere to put the euros. So perhaps they've got a French bank account open already. They can put it in there. The other, and I would say more common way to buy currency, is utilizing something called a forward contract, which is this idea of fixing the exchange rate. People may have heard fixing the rate or read that. That's where you'd use something called a forward contract. So very similar to your spot contract in that you're agreeing to buy a set amount of euros from the off. Difference is that you can delay your settlement. So people typically tie that in with property completion dates. So you could fix your rate, you settle down the line, i.e. when you need it. So huge benefit there is it perhaps suits people who don't have the money available. Perhaps they're liquidating assets in the background. They've got other property to sell, but are worried about changing rates. That's a perfect solution. Or perhaps you've got the money available and you just want to leave it in your account. You know, interest rates are on the rise in the UK. You want to earn a bit of interest in the meantime. Great. You know, you can bridge the gap with that forward. And you can then go into different products where we can tailor sort of set trigger rates. So, you know, perhaps you've got plenty of time on your hands. You're not in a rush to buy currency now. You've got a budget level in mind. You can then set a rate and say, look, George, please notify me if we get to X, Y, Z. And I can obviously then buy currency on a specific instruction there. So say those very much depend on your risk appetite. Obviously, something like a forward contract, very risk adverse. You know, you're removing your risk from the off. Something where perhaps you're targeting a higher rate is a little bit more adventurous. You know, we might get there, we might not. But say key is we can structure those as needed, and obviously do a combination as well.
Fab, thanks. In terms of forward contracts, that's where you secure your rate for a certain period of time, right? This is a question I have, and I feel like the people listening will have this as well. If you have this contract in for a certain rate and then the markets change in your favor, can you still benefit from that better rate?
Yeah, good question, and obviously a very common one. On paper, no. So if you think about what a forward contract is, it's I'm buying you, let's say you're buying for £100,000, €100,000. I'm buying you that amount of euros now, hence fixing the rate, just giving you the option to pay for it when you need it. So if the exchange rate goes up, down, you're not affected in that we've already purchased the currency for you, so you don't get to benefit if it goes up. But likewise, you're not going to lose out if the exchange rate goes down. Now, of course, going into that tailoring a product, we could, of course, use a combination of things. So if you did want some upside potential, you can use a combination. So you could perhaps use a forward contract on, say, half of your exposure. So you could take the same example. You could do a forward contract on, say, 50,000. You give yourself some downside protection. But if rates then went up, you've still got 50,000 to buy. So in that aspect, yes, I could structure something that gives that payoff. But of course, it comes with a risk in that I can't guarantee rates are going to go up. So I'd stress that from the off. But on paper, no, but I can structure something that perhaps gives that reward if that's something you're after.
Great, thanks, George. I have wondered that one for a while.
It's very common.
No, of course, I bet it is. Leah, what are the biggest mistakes overseas buyers make in a legal term?
I think one of the main mistake is that very often people will not realize just how important the preliminary contract is, because obviously when you come into buying in France, you've got your experience as a UK buyer where you've got your exchange and completion, which can arrive very, very late in the process, so after you've got all your searches, etc. Whereas in France it is very different, because your preliminary contract will be ready quite early in the process, and then once you sign in, you've got your 10 days cooling off period, and then that's it. You cannot withdraw without being potentially at risk of losing your deposit or financial penalties. So it is very important to make sure that you ask the right questions and you completely fully understand your contract. Very often things that we see happen is that a French notaire or a French estate agent who are not used to dealing with British people are going to be very put off by questions British buyers are buying, just because you've got your experience of the UK, and France obviously is very different. And very often either it can cause tensions, or you'll be told, oh, don't worry about that, we don't do it that way in France. You shouldn't back down at this time. And this is why having a lawyer acting only for you is such a benefit, because then we can tell you, no, actually, is that right? Like, don't worry about it. That's not a concern at all. Or, do you know what? No, I think that is something we need to dig into. So that's why, taking this independent legal advice is really important in avoiding mistakes, especially if you are buying, for example, an apartment in a residence building under the French copropriété regime. What happens is that you are buying your apartment, but then you also have financial commitments, quarterly charges, etc., due, and you will be committed to following all the guidelines of the buildings, etc. So there will be a huge set of rules applying to you. And when you get your preliminary contract, you get your contract, fine. You can see it's a contract, red flag. However, you're also going to get probably hundreds of pages of documents in French that nobody is going to tell you. They are really important. And you absolutely cannot miss reviewing those in details, because they will give you an idea of the financial commitment you're making in the long run. You can see people keep arguing, building work is required. Is this something that I really want to get into, or actually do I want to purchase something else where things will be a little bit more manageable?
Thanks, Leah. A question for both of you, really. Let's say I've been dreaming of buying a property in the south of France for my whole life. Let's pretend I'm older than I am, because I'm probably not quite ready for that. At what stage do you think, in an ideal property purchase in France, should a buyer be talking to you? So talking to Smart Currency for finance help, and to a lawyer. George, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So never too early to get in touch. I think it's a very common misconception that people come to us arguably too late. They found a property, got an offer accepted, perhaps they've received their compromise contracts already, and they say, look, I need to send some currency. What's the rate? Obviously very little we can do in terms of value. Of course, we can give you a rate, and send the funds across, but in terms of budgeting, I say avoiding that obviously risk, perhaps it's too late. So I would say never too early. We have clients who get referred to us a couple of years in advance. I would say that the prime opportunity is perhaps once you've obviously you've got certain plans, you're perhaps arranging a viewing trip. A lot of clients personally get in touch with me prior to viewing trips. Obviously, I can give you an idea of what rates are doing, what your budget looks like in sterling, so that if you do find a property and want to make offers, you can do so with confidence. You know where the rates are. I can give you a bit of a flavour as to where they've been. Perhaps what your max budget might be, what your minimum might be. So yeah, very simple. I would say never too early. Don't be shy to approach us, and get all your ducks in a row. You don't want to leave it too late.
Thanks, Leah.
Yes, so I absolutely cannot highlight enough the importance of getting your finances in order before you even think about, making the trip over. We've seen situations happen where people were not ready to pay the deposit, which you have to pay on very early, 10% if you're buying at 500,000 euros, at 50,000 euros that you need to have ready to buy. So really do speak to a currency person as early as possible. That is really, really important. In terms of the lawyers, you can wait a little bit longer, because where we really kick in is when you have actually found a property to buy. That's because obviously the legal advice that we're going to give you and the things that we're going to tell you to look into is going to be very, very dependent on the property itself, the characteristics, and obviously your personal profile, how you're financing your purchase, whether you are, needing a mortgage, etc. So the time you want to speak to us is when you have your offer document. There is some misconception that an offer document is quite informal, it's just a way to make an offer, but actually it does set the tone to your entire transaction. For example, if in the offer document it says that you will pay a deposit, and then actually you're like, oh, well, no, I've been told that actually deposits are not mandatory, etc., then your seller is going to be on the back foot, and then everything goes wrong. Likewise, if you have yourself any specific condition, for example, timescales, you are interested in buying, but you need to wait 6 months for completion for XY reason, then this is something that you would actually go into your offer document just to manage your seller's expectation and to avoid things completely falling apart when you come to negotiate your contract. So yes, talk to your lawyer before you sign your offer and really put everything on the table. Even things you might think as very small thing, talk to us, and then we will let you know this needs to go into the offer. We don't need to put it into the offer, but let's flag it with the agent now, because it will take them some time to organize additional surveys or get quotes, etc. So that's really important, so that we can start a collaborative process to make sure that everything goes as you would expect it to.
Fab, thanks, Leah. I will mention now for everyone listening, we will share contact details for book calls and smart currency after this call, so you can get in touch and ask your own questions, just more specific to your situation. I can see quite a few questions coming in on the subjects of using your bank to buy property abroad. George, I can see Leah shaking her head, she knows. So George, I'll just spit these two questions at you. Can you do better exchange rates than the Bank of Scotland? And another, do I need to buy currency to buy a house in France, or can I do a bank exchange from a UK bank to buy the house? Over to you.
Yeah. So very, very common questions. I think you'd be shocked at the amount of people who still default to using their traditional high street bank when buying abroad. They think it's the only option. I hate to say it's a very expensive option. So obviously traditional high street banks, so Bank of Scotland, being one of them, very, very expensive. Not just in terms of fees. I think that's where people get misguided. They'll see a fee on the platform and say, well, it might cost me 50 euros or 50 pounds to send abroad. The fees are not really, so where it's at is it's the exchange rate itself. So if you really dig down into the exchange rates that the high street banks offer, I mean, they're hideous to be frank. They're not very good, which is fine. You know, if you're looking to send a couple of £100, you know, for your holiday, you know, it's a couple of euros here or there. You scale that up to property size transactions, which are often, you know, sort of close to, if not obviously in excess of 6 figures. You know, that small point in an exchange rate on paper doesn't look like a lot. Yeah, you extrapolate it out, it's thousands of pounds. So I would say, I mean, against traditional high street banks, when you're using a service like ours, savings are anywhere from 1 to, I mean, as much as 3% in terms of rates. So, you know, again, you take a straightforward £100,000 purchase, you know, 1% is a minimum £1,000 saving on an exchange rate, all the way up to, you know, potentially 2-3. So yeah, in terms of rates, your banks are very expensive, but I would say arguably more important is sort of the previous questions about, you know, what products we can offer. Again, you go to your bank, you know, one, you're not dealing with someone who's experienced, you know, no offense to the perhaps bankers out there, but you know, it's not their forte. You know, they're obviously usually a bank teller, you know, behind the till. They can look what the exchange rate is. You know, do they know if it's a good time, bad time? You know, what's likely to happen to the rates over the next 3 to 6 months? Probably not. And obviously the product mix on offer, all they can offer you is, this is the live rate. You know, take it or leave it, Mr. Customer. You know, it's unfortunately, when you're buying a house, say, you know, there's a lot of risk out there in terms of market movement. You know, you need as much guidance as you can get. That's where we specialize. You know, the difference of you know, exchange rates one day to the next. I mean, a stat for you is in the last 3 months, you've seen 7% worth of change in pound to euro exchange rate. So 7%, again, you know, it's huge on a property transaction. So you want to be aware of that and mitigate that. So yeah, high street banks are a no-go, very expensive and you know, not a lot on offer.
Oh, thank you, George. I think, sorry, I'm just trying to read questions at the same time. I have a question from Barbara. She has a limited budget, but is a cash buyer, hopefully buying in France. How soon should she deposit her funds in order to purchase at a favourable rate?
Yeah, great question. So if you're a cash buyer, I think, you know, you're in a great spot in that, you know, you can buy currency at any stage. If you've got a limited budget, again, I'd highlight the risk involved in that, you know, what you don't want to do is wait until you found a property. You know, if the exchange rates then drop, perhaps that property now becomes outside of your budget and you know, you're in a hole from the start. So never too early to buy currency. Again, engage with us. You know, part of my role as an account manager is, you know, I can keep you abreast of those movements. You know, whether you wanted to buy straight away, whether you had a specific budget rate in mind that I can target for you. You know, so I would say never too early. Beauty of our service as well, I suppose another benefit over your high street bank is you don't have to have an end destination to use our service. Okay, so you don't have to have a French bank account set up. So that's, again, misconception. People think they have to have it set up in advance. We have to send it out. You know, we can provide that holding facility if needed. You know, so you could buy your euros now. If you complete on the purchase in a month, 2 months down the line, it's not a problem. You know, you can rest easy knowing that you've budgeted effectively. You're no longer exposed to the financial markets, and we can send it on when needed.
Fab, thank you. We have a question for Leah. Is it possible for an English will to be valid in France?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Nothing to do with Brexit or anything like this. Actually, France and England are both part to a Hague Convention that dates back to 1960s, which says that an English will is automatically valid in France. What I suspect you're asking me is in terms of what the will actually says rather than the will itself, especially in terms of wanting to benefit your spouse over your children, etc. Unfortunately, the answer to that is a lot more complicated. France is very protective of its forced heirship. It has managed to reintroduce it through the back door. So the position at the moment, to answer your question, is it is going to depend a lot on your personal circumstances. If what you are getting at is you would like to protect your spouse or your children, which is fair enough. It's what most English people ask us to do. There are a lot of things that can be done to achieve this, but you would need to take the advice before you complete on your purchase. So that's, I think, one of the main pitfalls, is that people do tend to focus on the purchase, which is fine. However, what they don't realize is that some of the options can only be done at the time of purchase. So by not taking your legal advice in terms of inheritance before you get started on your process, you might be, removing some very good options from the pool of what you can do to achieve your testamentary wishes.
Lovely. Another question for you, Leah, and this is a personal one. Kevin bought a house in 2016 as a second home. At the time of purchase, his notaire added a tontine to give our English will precedence over French inheritance law. Does this still stand after Brexit? And do you want to give a little description of what a tontine is?
Tontine, yeah, I will give you an explanation about tontine. So in France, the default way of owning property between two people, or as many people as you want, is called en indivision. En indivision is similar to tenants in common in the UK, in that when the first person dies, the share doesn't automatically go to the survivor. What it happens is that the share will pass to your estate in accordance either with your will or intestacy provisions. Obviously, when things like this happen, there is this question of whether French law and foresairship apply or whether English law apply, and it can get really, really tricky. What a tontine does, a tontine is a provision that can only go into your deeds at the time of purchase. So you can't add it after the fact. And what it does is that when the first one of you dies, the surviving owner will be considered to have owned the property in their sole name from the date of purchase. So basically what it does is that there is no share in the property to be inherited. So you completely remove it from the estate and you protect it that way to ensure that your surviving owner does receive the property outright. One caveat to that is that obviously it doesn't apply in terms of inheritance tax, otherwise everybody would use it to avoid paying inheritance tax. So you still have to pay inheritance tax on the transfer. But in terms of inheriting, the share, that completely protects it. Wills have nothing to do with it. If you got a tontine, nobody is even going to look at your will or whether you have a will, etc. The tontine kicks in automatically. There is no need to do any formal estate administration. What happens is you just write to the land registry saying, "Hi, we had a tontine. Other owner has died. Here is a death certificate. Can you please make a note?" And that's literally all you need to do on top of obviously paying your French inheritance tax. And therefore, tontine has existed in France since the Middle Ages, and Brexit has not affected them at all. So tontine are still very much a good option, especially since the changes in French law in November of 2021, which have undermined the viability of doing English wills.
Sorry, talking to myself. Do you need to buy a property first before applying for a carte de séjour? Is that something you know, Leah?
The answer to that is no. Not to the question. The answer to do I know the answer? No, I don't know the answer. I'm not an immigration lawyer. Immigration is very, very specialized. I do have a colleague who does French in immigration. So if you want to speak to her, send me an email and I will pass you on. I believe that from what she told me is that you don't need to own a property. For example, if you move to France and start renting there, then you will start qualifying for, being able to apply for visas, etc. But obviously, it is a lot more complicated than this, and you need to talk to a specialist for proper immigration advice. However, if you're moving to France, it's going to impact your inheritance, so talk to an estate planning lawyer as well.
Thank you. I've got a comment from Ian. He says he's heard a few instances where people have been sold property, but the deeds haven't been genuine. He's asking how can this be overcome? I imagine this might be something to do with the translation.
This is literally not something that can happen in France.
Okay, no problem.
As long as you have a notaire involved in the transaction. If you don't have a notaire, the transaction is illegal. Notaires are the only one who can do property transfers in France. However, if you've got a notary involved, they have a professional liability to check the deeds and also check there is good title to the property going back 30 years. So I do not know what happened to those people. I feel terribly for them. But if you are purchasing and a notary is involved, then you have absolutely no concerns to have.
Oh, thank you. A question for George. Steve's asking, do you think he could get a better rate with Smart than he could with a little shopping around on the web?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, Smart obviously offer very, very competitive rates. You know, I would always say, you know, if you want to do some shopping around, you know, as with any products, you know, definitely do so. But I mean, once you steer away from your high street banks, you'll find rates amongst specialists. So Smart being also a very big specialist, very much the same. So you know, that's the biggest saving you're ever going to make. You know, sort of comparing, you could compare 5 to 10 of the top, you know, sort of specialists in the industry. You're not going to see a lot of change. I suppose the key is, you know, product mix on offer and you know, sort of what account management goes with that. But yeah, I would say, you know, rates are always flexible. You know, it's not to say this is our rate, take it or leave it. You know, but the key is, you know, we want to be adding value to you rather than just giving you a rate on the day to say, look, this is it. Yeah, take it or leave it. But yeah, if you want to shop around, yeah, I'd encourage you to do so.
Thanks. I have a question for Leah. Someone's asked, does the offer document for a home come from the seller? And I think it might be helpful if you would be able to explain the difference between a compromis de vente and an acte de vente, the two legal contracts.
Yeah. So the question was about the offer, wasn't it? So
Yes.
I'll just explain the 3 documents. So your offer usually is prepared by the estate agent, and then it is countersigned by both the buyer and the seller. So it's a reciprocal agreement. It's not something that the seller, you know, offers you. Usually you tell your estate agent, I'm thinking of offering that much money. They will have a quick chat with the seller. It will be like, yeah, that sounds good. And then they will prepare the actual formal documents. They will put the conditions in there. The seller might tell them, I want a 10% deposit and I want my contract signed within 2 weeks. It will go in there. You will say, I want a property completely cleared because there is a barn with rubbish and I want to complete in 6 months' time. Your estate agent will put that in there, and then both you and the seller will sign the document. Afterwards, about the compromis, the compromis is your preliminary contract. We use the word preliminary contract rather than compromis because in France, you can either have a compromis or a unilateral promise to sell, which is something that is favored by notaires. So if your estate agency is preparing a contract, they will usually do a compromis. And if a notaire is preparing the preliminary contract, it will usually be a promesse de vente. I will not go into the technicalities of the differences between both contracts. If both have pros and cons in terms of commitment and risk on buyer and seller side, but it is very, very legal. So that's something we would really discuss on a one-to-one basis. Afterwards, once you've signed your preliminary contract, you get your 10 days cooling off period, whether you've signed a compromis or a promise to sell. And then usually 2 to 3 months down the line, you will sign the acte de vente. The acte de vente is, you will just translate it to the transfer deed, and it is the document that puts the property into your name, and then it gets published at the land registry, and it then becomes a deed to your property.
Fab, thank you. A question for George. What advice? Sorry, I've just lost it. What advice? No, I don't think that's relevant to our experts. We have a TransferWise Euro account based in Belgium. Would this be good enough for any transfers or property purchases, or would you recommend opening a bank account with a local bank in France?
Yeah, good question. I suppose not specifically our domain, but I would say in sort of simple answer, yes. You know, it's as good as a bank account. Obviously, you can still use So a service like ours to convert fixed rates and then ultimately put those euros into your Wise Belgium account. So I would say, just as good as a local one. It's my understanding you don't necessarily need a specific French account. I don't know if Leah would chip in on that.
You actually do. What is going to happen is that if you want to start paying things by direct debit, for example, your property taxes, your insurance, your utilities, a French company will only accept a French bank account. So you have to have a French, what they call a French domiciliated account, and they will not let you put direct debits on any TransferWise accounts, etc. Obviously, in France, some things that people might not be aware is that if you're not French or you don't live in France, you will actually not be allowed to open a French bank account until you have actually completed on your purchase. So often what's happened is you take your little certificate of purchase that you are given at your completion appointment, and then you go straight to the bank, fingers crossed they are open, because that's difficult. And then you're like, there you go, I now own a property in France, can I please have my bank account as soon as possible? And then you will start setting up your direct debit. So, TransferWise may be good for those initial, payments, etc. Though I personally have a TransferWise account, and for a property purchase, I wouldn't use it. I would want to talk to an actual person who is going to tell me advice about the exchange rate and make sure the money goes where it is supposed to go, when it is supposed to go. And but otherwise, you will 100% need your French bank account once you got your property. Otherwise, it is unmanageable.
Lovely. George, I have a customer here who would like to sell his Paris apartment to his daughter. They're both live in the UK. Is it possible to pay her from a UK account to his UK account without transferring money to France?
Good question. But Leah might be able to chip in on this one as well. I mean, in terms of currency exchange, I think it's very rare to complete on a transaction using sterling. Leah will be able to sort of chip in on that one. But I mean, on paper, if it's agreed by a notaire and that's the way to go, then yes. But I don't know how complicated that would be. I mean, put it this way, I've done the job 10 years. I think I've had 1 or 2 transactions completed in sterling. So it's very, very rare.
Yeah, so the answer so she's buying from you rather than receiving a gift. So that's a big difference because it changes the process. But in principle, you can do a sterling transaction. You need the notaire to agree to that. What will happen then is that the seller, will still have to transfer euros to France. You will have to transfer the notaire's fees. And also any French capital gains tax that you may owe on your sale, and then your daughter will also have to transfer euros to France because she will have to pay the stamp duty on the purchase. But then otherwise, if the notaires agreed, it is allowed. It is not illegal to have the money transferred from account to an account. Obviously, it comes with some risks. For example, the French tax authorities could say, is this a disguised gift, in which case we should have paid gift tax, etc. So when the money goes to the notaire's account, while from an exchange rate perspective, and maybe that's something George, would be able to mitigate, sending sterling to euros only to get the euros back into sterling seems like an absolute waste of exchange rate and fees, etc. What it does, it creates the perfect audit trail so that nobody can go and try and say this transaction, something wrong. There is something fishy about it, and then some people will start asking questions, which is not a fun position to be in.
Fab, thank you. I have a question for Leah. What are the average solicitor fees in France?
So I assume that means notaire's fees rather than solicitor's fees. You don't need a UK solicitor to buy in France. However, you do need a notaire because they are the only ones who are allowed to do property transfer. Notaire's fees, it's actually very unfair to call them notaire's fees. We should call them purchase fees because they are fixed by the French state. So it is not something the notaire has any leeway to negotiate, and they actually receive very little of it. You should budget 7 to 8% of your purchase price. This will cover stamp duty, all the registration taxes, and the 1% that the notaire actually gets paid.
Fab, thank you. I have two for George about Smart. Do you offer exchange services for the dollar? Is anything different if you're American, not British? And another question, is there a minimum amount of currency that you can buy?
Yeah, so two good questions. So minimum, very, very simply, no, we help with absolutely anything and everything. So no minimum, no maximum. It's worth pointing out as well, we don't just help with the property purchase itself. We've got products and tools to help with the ongoing maintenance of that. So perhaps you buy a lovely swimming pool in the south of France. You need to pay for the maintenance there. You've got a mortgage on the property that's denominated in euros. You also need to pay that with your sterling income. So no minimum. I say we can again tailor products. We've got sort of direct debit, standing order type solutions there. So no minimum. And in terms of the US dollar, yeah. So we help with, I'll be honest, almost any currency you can imagine. There are the few very, very exotic ones that we don't delve in, but yeah, US dollar and euro, obviously big clients for us. So yeah, definitely help with US dollar. In theory, process is exactly the same. So whether you're funding that purchase, perhaps you're buying in France, but funding it with US dollars, everything I've said so far is absolutely applicable to US dollars. It's just the source currency is different. So yeah, definitely something we can help with. No different in process.
Lovely. Just on the back of that, is Smart Currency Exchange FCA authorized? If so, this is someone's question. If so, I think the guarantee is 85k. If you go bust, everything above 85k of my money in your account is at risk. Is that correct?
So no, it's not correct. So again, quite a common misconception. That 85k is in reference to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, so the FSCS, which applies to personal bank accounts. So that's strictly true to your high street bank. In terms of FSA, or it's now the FCA. So yeah, we're absolutely authorized. So we're actually one of a small number of companies to have full authorization by the Financial Conduct Authority. So again, I'd stress that in any currency service that you look for, you need to make sure they're FCA authorized, regulated. It's the sort of hallmark of financial services regulation. So yes, we've got full authorization there. In reference to the 85k, so we operate using what's called segregated client accounts. So you've actually got full protection from smart currency, as it were. So if anything happened to the business while holding your funds are completely secure. So there's no cap on that. They're held in segregated accounts. So i.e. they're not part of the operating funds. So clients' money remains secure and fully secure at all times. So no cap. Arguably, you've got more protection. And yes, we've got full authorization by the FCA.
Thanks, George. Leah, I have a question on the tontine. Capital gains on the transfer. I'm not sure what transfer you mean. Is it the whole property value increase or something different? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think there is a slight confusion maybe in terms of the various taxes. Capital gains tax only applies if you are selling a property. If your tontine kicks in, it's because somebody has died. So the tax would be inheritance tax rather than capital gains tax. And the inheritance tax would be calculated based on the value of the property of the half share at the time of death. And then your relationship with the person who's passed away. Obviously, if you were married, there will be a full inheritance tax exemption. So in short, there won't be any tax due on the tontine transfer. However, if you are an unmarried partner, then the rate is a rate of 60% inheritance tax. So obviously, that's something that you need to plan for. And we do actually end up telling people, please get married. It will make your tax position easier. So that's something, if you are considering purchasing in France and you are not married, it is very, very important to to take this advice to make sure that you don't end up with a 60% inheritance tax bill, because we don't like telling you about them and not being able to do anything about it. So importance of proper planning.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Another question for you. In the best possible circumstances, and a whole property purchase goes smoothly, what is, on average, the minimum amount of time between viewing? Oh no, sorry. I'm getting halfway through the question and realizing it's a bit more suited to a notaire.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm happy to take it.
This person's asking the minimum amount of time between viewing and making offer, and then moving in.
So the absolute minimum amount of time, which will literally never happen, because it will mean you sign your offer and your preliminary contract literally on the same day, is 2 months. And the reason for that is that over most of France, you've got your local authority who have what is called a preemption right, which means that they need to be given notice that the purchase is happening, and then they get to say whether they are actually wanting to buy the property or not. Most of the time, what happens is that they receive their notice and they don't say anything, and you have to wait 2 months, after which you can safely assume that they are not interested and your transaction can proceed. So minimum amount of time is 2 months, but that's from preliminary contract to completion. I would easily add a month onto the process, just because somebody has to draft your preliminary contract. Everybody is always very busy, so that takes some time to do. Sometimes you are missing documents, especially buying like in an apartment building. You've got your managing agent who has to provide a whole lot of paperwork. Likewise, this can take some time. So I think in the best case scenario, from offer to completion, 3 months, we would be a really good go at it. And you can move in on the day of completion, by the way. That is what usually happens. Because I know the question did say can move in. You can move in on the day of completion. That's actually what 99% of people do.
Okay, fab. I will say, if we don't get to your question, they will be forwarded to George and Leah afterwards. So we can get back in touch.
I can see the 119 questions. So I'm
slightly
terrified
now. Question for Leah. Capital gains is not paid on UK main home sale. Is it paid on French property?
If your French property is your main residence, no, you are exempt from paying French capital gains tax. The caveat to that is that it has to be your actual main residence. Don't move there for 2 months before selling it, because you will get caught by the French tax authorities. You would not believe the amount of detective work they have time to do when trying to claim taxes. We have had, not me personally, but obviously we can see court cases of cases where the French tax authorities have gone and looked at the utilities and be like, there is no way you were actually living there using that little water unless you stop washing for 2 months. And that way they were able to say, you lied about it, your main residence, you made it happen only to avoid paying capital gains tax, and they will catch you. So, but obviously, if it is a legitimate sale of your main French residence, then yes, you will be exempt.
Thank you. I have a question for George now. What if I don't exchange enough money for the purchase of a property, or exchange too much? How do I access the remaining amount of their currency?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few things you could do. So if you haven't got an offer accepted yet, so perhaps you were a cash buyer buying euros, ahead of knowing your amounts, we always say to slightly underestimate. It's always better to top up a small amount later than have to cancel any off. That being said, very much dependent on you as an individual. Perhaps you plan to do renovation work, or you're going to spend a lot of time holidaying there. If you buy an extra couple of €1,000, is that going to be a problem for you individually? Could you use that towards your furniture or your notaire's fees? So you could probably find a use for a small overpayment. You can, of course, sell any currency back. So if you drastically overbuy, perhaps tens of thousands more, you found yourself a bargain while you're out there and you bought your max budget amount of euros, we can sell it back. It's not a sort of traditional same rate that you bought. So you leave yourself open to a bit of a market potential risk, benefit. There's no definitive cost to convert it back. It's just whatever the live exchange rate is there and then. And we can, of course, split the payment as well. So again, a very common question I get, in my sort of day to day is, can you split the euros? So let's say we bought 150,000 euros. You want to send 120 of that to the notaire and 30 of that in due course to your own French account. We can do that as well. So we can split the payment if you've overbought. As Les says, once you've got a French bank account open, we can fund that. And obviously anything, if you're too short, we can always top up, sort of nearer the time.
Fab, thanks. Leah, what would happen if an offer is accepted for a property in France and the seller pulls out?
So technically, the seller is not allowed to pull out from the moment you sign the offer. This is the theoretical legal answer. In practice, I do not know anybody who would go to court to force a seller to sell to them after withdrawing from an offer. So if that happened, I would say they are very wrong to do that. Legally, they're not allowed to. But in practice, how much money do you want to throw at forcing them to complete, knowing that they are literally going to be forced into the transaction? Obviously, the position is very, very different once you have signed your preliminary contract, because then you can ask for penalties to be paid, etc. So that's then something you would consider more seriously. If a seller withdraws after signing an offer, it's not a good move. I can't say I've seen it happen at all. I think especially if you buy from a French seller, they know about it. And what happens is that either the estate agent who negotiated the sale and who has the seller pull out will also pursue them for the commission. So they tend to, fall in line. But otherwise, I don't think there is much you would want to do about it. It would just be a waste of your time and of your mental health as well.
Thank you. I have a question. I think there's quite a few questions on this topic. So if someone's looking to buy a property and want to make changes to the property, so the purchase is dependent on planning permission, what would you advise?
That's a really good question. And what we advise is that you should add into your preliminary contract a planning permission condition. The issue now with planning permission condition is that they take absolute ages. So if you really want to make your purchase subject to planning, you have to be ready to have to wait 6 months to a year before you can complete. That's because of the way planning permission work in France. So the first step is you apply, then your local authority has a period of time during which they can give you an answer. Sometimes if it's like a listed area, or for example, if you're buying on the Ile de Ré or Corsica or anything, the entire island will be protected. It has to be kicked back to a higher authority to sign off. Once you have your planning permission, the process doesn't stop there, because what you have to do, it has to be displayed on the property, and then the neighbors get to lodge objections, and likewise they got a couple of months to contest the planning permission. So what you want, if you want what is called a fully purged planning permission, which means without any right of contestation available, and that can take 6 months. So that's something you need to negotiate with your seller straight away, because you will need them to authorize you to make a planning permission on the property that you don't own. Because obviously if the local authority needs to go on the property, that's something that with your seller, likewise you display your planning permission, that's the seller who has to do that for you. But it is possible, but it is a very complicated, drawn out process. That said, if it is really important to you, for example, you really want a swimming pool, if you can't build a swimming pool, you do not want this house, do not fall into the trap of making your purchase subject to planning permission in principle. This is called a certificat d'urbanisme, so a town planning certificate. It gives you an authorization in principle, but they are not worth anything legally. The only thing they do is they fix the planning rules for 6 months. So it means that if the land is buildable, it will remain buildable for 6 months. But even if it tells you, yes, in principle, you can build a swimming pool, in 80% of the cases, something is going to happen and you can't get exactly what you want. Or the higher authorities, the architect des bâtiments de France will say, no, actually, we've decided to do no longer swimming pools. We've got enough. It doesn't look that good. We've stopped doing them, etc. So only the fully purged planning permission will protect you, and you will want an architect to work with you on it, etc. So it is a very involved process, but that's something we can help you with in terms of making sure all the appropriate conditions are drafted into your contract.
Fab, thank you. That was a really great answer. I think we've got time for just one question each more. So I'll start with George. If someone needs to continue to pay mortgage payments to a French bank after purchase, is it better to set up a French bank account to do this, or use a currency exchange service like Smart?
So you could use both. So I think going back to the bank account question earlier, I think you obviously need a French bank account to have your mortgage taken out. So what is typically done is you can set up sort of corresponding direct debit standing orders. So your mortgage company will likely set up a direct debit from your French account. Obviously, you still need to fund that French account with what's likely going to be sterling income. So we can then help with that. So what we typically do is set up a reciprocal standing order so you can automate the whole process. So you could have sterling income, let's say it's £100 a month, taken from your UK account, obviously into your Smart facility. We could then automatically convert on, say, the first of each month into euros, automatically pay that into your French account, from which your mortgage direct debit will then be taken. So you can set that up pretty easily. Again, very, very common product with us. So yeah, you could use both. So I think you'll need to have a French bank account for your direct debit, but you'll still need to get the money in there, which is where we can help.
Lovely, thanks. And a final question to Leah. As part of the legal process, do you include translation of the legal documents, or is that a separate service?
So our belief is that translations of legal documents are very often absolutely pointless, because what they will do is they will give you a word-for-word translation, and I will give you an example of a provision that you can find in a French contract. The buyer declare is aware that Article 1792 of the Civil Code applies to this transaction and the consequences thereof. Fantastic. What does Article 1792 of the Civil Code means? The translator is not going to tell you that. So what we do is we will provide you with what looks like a translation, because we will go in writing provision by provision of the contract, but we will actually tell you what the provision means for you personally. Is it risky? Is it normal? It sounds very legalese. Actually ignore it because it never applies in practice, etc. This is something that obviously you need to discuss with your notaire, because the notaire, as a public official, does have an obligation to make sure that you, buyer, understand what is going on. Some of them don't care. They will give you a contract and they're like, sign it. I don't care if you speak French. I don't care if it's not in English, etc. Some of them will be like, oh, you've got a solicitor. Fantastic. That's fine. We will put in the contract that you are relying on to them to explain it to you. And some of them will say, we don't care, you've got a solicitor, we want you to get a translation on top of it. A French contract is 30 pages long. That's going to be like £2,500 worth of translation. If you're paying on top of that £5,000 worth of solicitor's fees, at some point it's just become really silly and a waste of money. So that's something you really need to speak to the notaire. Obviously, we are happy to talk to the notaire, on your behalf. Usually when they got a French person on the phone saying, yes, we are taking the responsibility that the legal advice of understanding lies with us and no longer with you. And yes, you can put it in the contract, and I will sign the contract as well if you want me to. Very often they will be reassured, and we can actually give you, this actual advice that you would never get from a translation.
Fabulous, thank you. That is about all we've got time for today. I want to give final thanks to George and Leah for some really insightful tips and advice. We strongly recommend that you get in touch with them directly to discuss your requirements in detail. Thank you to all our viewers for joining us and watching this session. I would like to invite you to our biannual virtual event on the 25th of March. I can share a link to that on the screen now. bear with me. It's a bit of a tricky one.
I will be there as well. So if you want to keep asking more questions, I will be also speaking for France at the virtual.
Bear with me. Send a call to action. There we go. So you should be able to click that right now. If you just click register today, you'll be able to sign up for the day. It's on Saturday, the 25th of March. You'll be able to meet experts like George and Leah, speak to them one-on-one, attend a whole range of seminars throughout the day. So yeah, feel free to do that. We also have other resources available that you can access through youroverseashome.com. And do take a look at our website for further webinars. Thanks again and happy property hunting. Thanks, Leah. Bye. Thanks, George. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.